Mind Your Farm Business on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by RBC Royal Bank.
Welcome to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast brought to you by RBC Royal Bank. I'm Shaun Haney, founder of RealAgriculture.com and host of Real Ag Radio on Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM. You can find more episodes of this podcast by going to mindyourfarmbusiness.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Have you ever heard somebody say, farmers need to tell their story? Tell your story or somebody else will. In today's era of digital technologies and communications, consumers are driven by personal bonds and engagements. They crave relationships with brands just as they do with friends and colleagues. That's where the power of brand storytelling comes into play. It stirs emotions within your audience and fosters a really solid bond. The magic of brand storytelling lies in its ability to differentiate you from the crowd, leaving an imprint that's quite unforgettable, thereby transforming your audience into customers. A well-crafted brand storytelling strategy cultivates a real vibrant community brimming with engagement. It gives your brand, your company, a human face, enabling you to form genuine connections. But hold on. That sounds great, but does this really apply at all to farmers and ranchers? Well, our guest today on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast thinks so. We're going to talk to Jason Thompson. He's founder of Storyist. Now, with over 25 years of television, video gaming, mobile apps, book publishing, and advertising experience, Jason is obsessed with innovating new ways of creating amazing narratives that are absurdly memorable and effective. He's the creator and founder of Storyist, a story consulting company that helps people and businesses find and tell their best stories. Let's get to the conversation with Jason Thompson of Storyist. Welcome to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, Jason.
Thanks so much for having me, Shaun. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, so tell us about yourself.
Well, I am a dad and longtime storyteller who lives in Canmore in the beautiful mountain town here in Alberta. And I have been working in film, TV, and video games for the last 25 years. And over the last 3 years, I have been running my own consulting practice rooted in strategic storytelling. And I like to say that I help build people's conviction, clarity, and confidence for business leaders through strategic storytelling.
Okay, so obviously you have a major creative flair based on your background. So I guess, how do you define strategic storytelling?
So I find a lot of times people equate storytelling with reading to their kids, which is absolutely correct. It's amazing, and I encourage every single parent to do that. But storytelling is also a really effective tool to lead social change. Look at how Martin Luther King used storytelling for that. Storytelling is used by people like Oprah Winfrey to create a global phenomenon that a whole bunch of people follow. It's used by great leaders like Steve Jobs, who sold cajillions of Apple products because he was a great storyteller. So for me, storytelling is a way to connect with people on an emotional level that drives outcome. Because a great story is a lovely story if you're just looking to tell something from an entertainment standpoint. But when it comes to business, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to people wanting to get something from that story, it's got to be strategic in thought. So that idea of like adding our thinking process to what is it that I want, what is the action I want to inspire from the narrative that I'm sharing, is where we get that idea of strategically using storytelling to bring about an outcome.
Is there a certain type of story or a pattern to storytelling that better connects to the emotions of people than others?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love the word used there, pattern. So we are all storytelling animals. I mean, there's been a couple of great books written about that, many great books, in fact. And so I firmly believe that we are all storytellers, but some of us do it better than others. And so those patterns and frameworks certainly do exist. I mean, people like Joseph Campbell, who wrote The Hero's Journey, and Robert McKee, who wrote a book on story, they all talk about this idea of an arc in a great story. And this is true whether it be a book, whether it be a movie, whether it be a television show, whether it be a business presentation, whether it be, a talk to employees. And that is, from my perspective, you show the way things used to be, or in filmic language, that's called the ordinary world. So what was a moment of change, which is this big kind of aha, oh my gosh, we're no longer going to do things the same way, or we have to do things differently because, which then leads us to part 3, which is the new world, or what is, or what will be. So what was, what changed, what is, or what will be. That's the pattern that is kind of the formula that I use, that I've created, that I've adapted from, other giants of the story world, that really allows you to say, these are the kind of 3 structures that you need to use in order to create a narrative that connects with someone on an emotional level. And we are often afraid of the word conflict or problem, but it's what audiences enjoy. I mean, I love to say, if Harry Potter had 2 loving parents, was in full control of his wizarding powers, and had loads of friends, J.K. Rowling would still be writing in a coffee shop, right? It's the fact that he had to overcome these challenges that made, his story interesting. And it's no different for any of us, whether we're running a, agricultural business or a software company. The way we can connect with our customers is by taking them on a journey, by making them the hero, and helping them overcome a problem that they either know or they don't know that they have.
Yeah, I saw a Twitter thread the other day talking about the Rock, and specifically his tequila business. And the person that was doing the thread talked about how what is so unique about the Rock's tequila is not the taste, it's not how it's made. It is his ability and the marketing team's ability to tell a story around that tequila. And, I can't remember the exact name of it, but, essentially branding it the people's tequila, and really weaving a story around it has really led them to create a $1 billion+ valued business, and looks obviously for even to make it larger. But they said storytelling was really the key to their success.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, and certainly The Rock has got a huge persona from which he can draw from to lend to that business. Another great example of that is Ryan Reynolds and what he is doing with, at first, Aviation Gin. I mean, I have no idea if that gin's any better than any other gin, but guess what? He tells terrific stories around it, right? He's done the same thing with Wrexham FC, the football club. That he's a co-owner of. I believe he has an advertising agency, and they create stories for whatever, Mint Mobile, whatever kind of product he's involved in. They understand that storytelling is the way to connect. So yeah, whether it be big celebrities like The Rock or Ryan Reynolds, or small mom and pop shops right here in Alberta, I think one of the best strategies that people can use to, again, inspire an action, an outcome that they're looking for, be it selling more tequila or getting investors on board for a new project idea, using a story cleverly and effectively is one of the best ways that you can get people to change their behaviors.
Yeah, so you've told a good story here. You've got me convinced. I've got the emotional connection to what you're bringing here. Let's put it in a business sense, and there's going to be some of our audience that's going to say, that's listening right now, is thinking, well, you know what? A lot of farmers sell wholesale. They're not selling directly to a consumer, right? Like we just gave the example of The Rock and his tequila. He's trying to connect directly with consumers through social media. A lot of farmers are selling to a grain company, or they're selling their livestock to a packing plant. I don't see how storytelling is going to help me. Now, I think you hit on something earlier, though. That's looking at it just from one angle. That's looking at it from the selling standpoint, right? There's a lot of internal stuff here. You've got a team of employees. You're trying to recruit people. You're trying to retain people. This plays a big part in that example.
Absolutely, it does. Yeah, you're right, Shaun. I'll pick up on that recruitment side of things. Well, part of the work that I do is related to businesses' culture story. So when you want to get clear about the kinds of people you want to be a part of your organization, it's really useful to be able to share culture and value stories. Because it's one thing to say, you know what, our business, we're all about resiliency and hardworking and kindness. Those are all great words. but we don't remember them unless there's an example of when that organization used kindness to benefit their employees or their customers, or when they show there's an example of resilience that is rooted in a story that allows us to share that down the road. So it can be used certainly for sales, but I firmly believe, and I've helped organizations restructure how they hire in their HR department by looking and using strategic storytelling themselves, and then in the employees or potential employees that they're looking at. It's something that you can use in your operations. So to actually inspire your employees to do something, be it, rooted to a farm business's origin story. Perhaps this is a third generation family business, and, the values that were, alive 100 years ago are still alive today in a slightly different way. It can be used to, as I said, like to inspire investment. It can be used to connect with, as you say, these wholesalers to say, well, here's the problem that we solve for you in a slightly different way than our competitors. And, I like to say data is critically important for sure, but no one is making a decision on bar graphs and PowerPoint slides and bullet points alone. When you're actually able to share data through a story, neuroscience has found that we remember that information 22 times higher. So it behooves all of us in business to say, well, what are those important bits that I want to share? And how can I wrap those in the story, again, to get an outcome? And I think for me, Shaun, that's the biggest thing, right? In entertainment, it's one thing. The Rock, okay, it's business, but it's sort of business and entertainment. When we get really to those, the grassroots people who are running businesses here in our province, I think the exciting opportunity is to say, what are your stories? And how can you create them and share them in a way that, again, inspires the action, the outcome that you're looking for?
Yeah, very, very true. A lot of times we're involved in storytelling, we don't even realize it. I think that's also based on some of those examples you gave. We'll get back to the rest of the conversation with Jason Thompson of Storyist here on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast. But first, a word from our sponsor, RBC Royal Bank.
This episode of Mind Your Farm Business podcast is brought to you by RBC. Maybe you've had an idea about upgrading your operation, or finally getting that renovation done, or buying some new equipment. Or you want to be a little less reliant on the weather from season to season. Get some help making it happen by speaking with an RBC Agriculture account manager. Then, set up an investment plan to make even more of your ideas happen. Visit rbc.com/chartyourcourse and get started today.
I remember I was at an event in Calgary one time. And it was at, I think it was at Char Bar, I think is the place in the East Village. And it was a large event with a lot of non-agricultural people, okay? And I was sitting by a buddy of mine, and the chef came out and said, tonight's dinner is going to be tenderloin from Texas Longhorn. And my mind went sort of like, I don't know if you know much about Texas Longhorns, but they're pretty skinny and slight, and I wouldn't think it's not like a big Angus, like, you know what I mean? It's like a Texas Longhorn. This is kind of weird. And then the chef told the story, and he connected it to this ranch in Longview and the history of the ranch and what the Longhorn meant to the ranch and the people and he weaved. And I don't know if it was true. It didn't even matter. All I could think about was, I can't wait to eat this Longhorn. But the story changed my attitude towards the meal that we were about to embark on. That's the art of storytelling.
That's super cool. I love that example. I'll pick up two things on what you just said there. One, we know that when we hear sort of data and facts, 2 areas of our brain get lit up. But when we hear stories, 7 get lit up, including our olfactory senses, which is crazy, right? When you think about it, you hear a story and you start, what am I smelling? So I imagine the chef was painting a picture for you in your mind that really activated all those areas. And of course, right, we're far more invested in the delight of eating something in this case when we understand the narrative behind it. Here's the steak, enjoy. Right? Here's a little story about this particular, this particular ranch, about this particular, breed of cattle, this particular farmer who's actually breeding it. All of a sudden, we're far more invested because we're making an emotional connection. And as much as we like to think we think about something first and then say it feels good. Neuroscience tells us we feel something. Our brain says, hey, that feels good. And then we think that we feel something. And so probably what that chef has become very skilled at is crafting a narrative around the food that is taking you on a journey. Remember, we were talking about that journey at the start before you've even put something in your mouth, which is just a lovely way to, again, make an emotional, a human connection with his customers or her customers.
Yeah, and you gave the example earlier of somebody saying it's a third generation farm or we're a century farm. Those are things that our industry and agriculture does all the time. We think of them as facts, but they're they are a part of a story. And that story is important to us, and that's a story of legacy. That's a story of pride, just as an example, right? So I just want to get across the point that we do this a lot more than actually I think we recognize inside of the industry of agriculture. I want to ask you about the actual art of storytelling, and this is an area where you focused a lot from a strategic storytelling standpoint. Has the art of the storyteller, is that faded at all in this world of like short clips, no attention spans, those kinds of things?
Oh man, that's such a great question, Shaun. So when I think about our long history and the indigenous tradition of oral storytelling, right, which is really, they've been able to kind of continue that tradition throughout, their history, whereas we tend to default to, have I got really 5 minutes to listen to what you're saying? I don't know. If the situation's right, if the setting is right, perhaps. So I came across a study at Stanford University last year that said, we in kind of westernized culture are getting 60,000 bits of information sent our way every day. 60,000. Our brains actually aren't wired for that. Like, we have now superseded what we can biologically take in. And so, we're seeing this, what do you want to call it? However number of characters, however many seconds, people can actually stay, attuned for. And so has the art changed, Shaun? Yes, it has, because our audience has changed even from 20 years ago. But I contend that if you craft a narrative in a way that brings people in and makes them feel something, you can kind of bump over those kind of obstacles that exist. I really believe today that because there's so much content out there, people are far more forgiving than they used to be as well. So if they hear something and it's not perfect, it's like, I'll take that kernel and I'll move on, right? In fact, sometimes if it's too polished, there's suspicion. Yeah. So something I'd love to leave your listeners with is this idea that published is far better than perfect. To try and get something perfect, crafted perfectly in 240 characters or in exactly 38 and a half seconds or whatever that might be, is almost less effective than just trying to get your message out there. And it has to come from truth. You're talking about yourself. I don't even know if it's true. I would contend nowadays people can find out.
Good point. Don't lie. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, don't lie. Like, people can find out, right? Like, I think it was the original founder of eBay made up a story about why they started the company, and people are like, that's not true. And it actually, they saw their stock price plummet when that kind of information came out. So it's got to be rooted in truth. You've got to talk about your why. So as we bring that back to, you're saying those legacy, farms and businesses that have been around, like, why are you doing what you're doing? That's what people are really interested in. And why is what you're doing going to benefit or help me? So when we start to poke at those issues that are really most intriguing for our customers, our clients, or whatever our audience might be, because I firmly believe we have to make them the hero, even with our origin stories, that's a little bit more focused on us and a little bit more our heroic journey. But the way we actually make a difference and cut through those obstacles that you're talking about, Shaun, is by helping our audience, whoever that might be, see how their lives are improved, changed, made different by virtue of working with us. And that's how a lot of the art of it is starting to change. But fundamentally, we are storytelling creatures. We come home from work, we come home from whatever we're doing today, and we're telling stories, right?
You wouldn't believe what happened today. Like that.
Yeah, exactly. So we just want to be more strategic about it when we have a specific outcome from a business standpoint.
What are we trying to accomplish? Right? What are the objectives? It's interesting, lately we've been in our Mind Your Farm Business episodes, it's amazing how many of these different topics come back to your why, your core values. Like it's and I would think from a company perspective, whether we're raising livestock, we're growing crops, and we're trying to tell a story of our operation and the products that we are producing and how we're going about that, connecting, like you said, connecting it to the why. And if you're able to connect it to those core values, then it really comes across as genuine. And to me, that's where you really connect. You really make that emotional connection, as you said, to the consumer of that story.
Yeah, 100%. That word genuine is critical, and I think that comes directly from it being true. So if you try and gloss up or make up or create something that isn't actually what's happened or isn't true, people are going to see right through it. Yeah. And I think the values word too is critically important. When I work with the different folks that I do, I ask them to think about their top 5 values, and then I say, and what's your core value? What's that number one that you'd never leave from? And then what is the polar opposite of that? Because often when we look at sort of the complete different side to what one thing might be, it emboldens us to tell the stories that we want. Because we can kind of slip into things kind of quickly and sort of go, well, that's fine, that's close enough. But if it's not really true to our values, it's not being genuine, and it's probably not really explaining that why that we've been referencing.
Now I want to move out just before we wrap up here. I want to move out of thinking about it from a single company entity standpoint around storytelling, and I want to talk about the industry for just a second here. Well, I gotcha. We hear a lot of times about how agriculture needs to tell its story, okay? So people are more aware, so people understand, that this whole area of social license. What we hear is agriculture needs to tell its story, or somebody else will. From a strategic storytelling standpoint, do you agree with that?
I do. I think that's true not just for agriculture. I think it's true for any industry. However, I would like to help your listeners understand something about that industry perspective. If you can imagine in your head an inverted triangle, okay, and it's cut into 4 slices, let's say. At the very top of that slice, let's say the industry is agriculture. The second one after that would be companies that would be part of that industry. The one underneath that would be the teams that are making up those companies. And the bottom one would be the individuals, the people who are making up those teams. Because I believe as much as agriculture needs to own their story, agriculture is an industry that's made up of people. So we tend to say like, well, B2B, we got to ensure that business to business is always working. And I would argue that it's P2P. It's people to people. So as much as the agriculture industry needs to do that, it's done through people. If you think of have you heard of a murmuration, Shaun?
No.
A murmuration is one of nature's most glorious activities that happens in the sky. And people can Google how this actually looks, but it is at times thousands of starlings, birds that are moving together through space. And it almost looks like a tornado or like a movable painting, and they're all flying in kind of tight unison together, never colliding, but it's this great big kind of dense mass of birds. And I like to think of the industry, in this case agriculture, as a murmuration. There's a whole bunch of things going on, but if you're trying to access that, it's too big, there's too much movement. What you need to do is speak to each individual starling, and what that will do is give you inroads into the team, into the company, and then the industry. So the best way that the agriculture industry can own their story is by having individuals that make up that industry find, create, and share their stories with that industry and beyond.
Good advice from a company standpoint too. It's not just here's the story from the company, but here's the story from the people in that company.
100%, Shaun. I mean, industries and companies, like let's say, I'm in the agriculture industry, and there's this company I really want to work with. God, I love them. It'd be so great to be with them. The thing is, they don't love us back. A company and an industry can't love us back. They're entities made up of people. In order to make that human emotional connection, you got to find the people behind those companies and those industries. So there's a saying, so I used to work in film and television, still do from time to time. And we would say in animation, which is, very complex and time consuming, you have to spend 50% of your time planning and 50% of your time doing for a TV show, a film, or what have you. So for me, from a strategic storytelling perspective, if 50% of our time is spent creating and sharing, we need 50% of our time finding, so that we're not wasting time, money, resources in what we're trying to say. Because if we're creating stories to sell to an industry, well, we're going to be speaking to that great big murmuration of things flying around and no one's going to hear us. But if we're creating narratives to people in those companies and those industries, that's when we can make those connections.
Jason, great stuff. I really appreciate you joining us here today for the Mind Your Farm Business podcast. Great, insightful conversation about strategic storytelling. I really thank you.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Shaun.
Jason tells a pretty compelling story for us to consider. It's always nice to hear from someone outside of the industry of agriculture that really gets us to reconsider how we view certain topics or challenges us to think about things just a little bit more broadly or differently. Hope you enjoyed today's discussion. If you have any feedback or comments, challenges, please email me at shaney@realagriculture.com, or you can call the Real Ag listener line at 855-776-6147. Let us know about some of the ways that you engage in strategic storytelling for your farm or ranching operation. You can find more episodes of the Mind Your Farm Business podcast by going to mindyourfarmbusiness.com. Thanks to RBC Royal Bank, and until next time, keep on minding your farm business.